In Los Angeles, producers who had once collaborated with top-tier American vocalists started mentioning his name as a reference point for tone control, phrasing, and precision. There was an unspoken respect among them. They recognized in Jungkook something rare, an artist who not only mastered the technical language of American pop, but added his own cultural rhythm that made it sound alive again. His success wasn't a surprise to those who had been paying attention, but even they admitted that the scale of his dominance in the US charts was beyond what anyone anticipated. What caught many artists off guard was how naturally he adapted to the American landscape. There was no forced attempt to fit in. His sound was modern, clean, and universal, yet the subtle texture of his delivery reminded listeners that this was someone who didn't imitate, he interpreted. His rise was not built on shock value or overexposure, it came through the consistent precision of his craft. American artists, especially those who had been through the unpredictable storms of fame, saw in him a reflection of something pure, almost disciplined in its simplicity, and they admired that. Behind the scenes, many well-known figures began studying his production style. A-list vocalists mentioned his tone in interviews. Some described it as liquid clarity. Others called it unbothered perfection. There was a growing sense that Jungkook had reached a level of balance that few artists could sustain, technical perfection without losing human warmth. For American singers, this was rare. In a market saturated with artificial layers, Jungkook's voice cut through the noise because it felt real. That authenticity resonated deeply within the community. As the news of his Hashon ranking spread, public reactions from American artists started to appear, some subtle, others open. A few reposted his live performances. Others commented on his stage confidence and vocal control. It wasn't fan behavior, it was professional acknowledgement. They knew what it took to perform at that level. Jungkook wasn't just celebrated for being the first or only, he was respected for doing it with an elegance that looked effortless. In an industry where effort is often masked by glamour, Jungkook made simplicity feel powerful again. For many, what set him apart wasn't just the sound, but his approach to it. While some pop acts chased trends, Jungkook built an atmosphere. His music didn't rely on complex production gimmicks. It built emotion through timing, breath, and precision. American musicians understood how rare that was. They saw in him a performer who valued silence as much as sound. Every pause, every breath before a note carried intention. That kind of control spoke to a level of maturity often found only in veteran performers, and yet he carried it at an age when most are still trying to define themselves. Inside creative circles, Jungkook became a quiet benchmark. Songwriters spoke about his understanding of melodic architecture, how he could make a repetitive hook feel new through phrasing alone. Producers admired his consistency, especially his ability to maintain vocal stability across different genres. R&B, pop, EDM, it didn't matter. He moved between them seamlessly, with a kind of calm authority. American vocal coaches even analyzed his performances for their students, breaking down his breathing technique and tonal accuracy. For the US music world, Jungkook had gone from being the BTS member with the great voice to the artist you study to learn balance. The reactions from peers weren't born out of surprise, they came from recognition. American artists know how difficult it is to stay relevant, to evolve while keeping authenticity intact. They saw Jungkook do it, not by chasing attention, but by building consistency. His stage presence was quiet, grounded, and yet impossible to ignore. It reminded some of the golden era of pop performance when charisma wasn't performed but felt. When he performed live in America, the energy wasn't fan hysteria, it was admiration. Musicians watched from backstage, noting the way he owned space without needing to command it. When Jungkook achieved that Haseon spot, major artists began referencing him in interviews as an example of global fluency. They understood the difference between international popularity and domestic respect. Many global acts had found fans in America, but few had won over the American artist community itself. Jungkook did. He earned it through discipline, through a sound that felt crafted rather than manufactured. American singers, rappers, and producers who had spent decades inside the system realized they were looking at someone who understood their language and refined it. A producer from Atlanta once said privately that Jungkook's tone reminded him of the precision of classic R&B, but updated for a digital generation. "He doesn't oversing," he said. "He trusts silence. That's something only seasoned vocalists understand." That statement captured the general mood in American circles, an acknowledgement that Jungkook had reached mastery. Artists who had spent years fighting to keep up with streaming algorithms noticed how he transcended them. His voice didn't need algorithmic boost. It carried naturally across platforms, reaching listeners who didn't even realize they were listening to a K-pop artist. To Americans, he was simply a great artist, no labels needed. One of the most telling reactions came not from a collaborator, but from a senior American performer who had once dominated pop radio. She said in a live stream, "You can tell when someone sings from habit and when someone sings from discipline. Jungkook has both. That's rare." The statement resonated because it captured why so many artists respected him. He wasn't chasing virality, he was chasing precision. And in an era where music often moves faster than meaning, Jungkook reminded them that mastery still matters. As months passed, the influence deepened. American artists started requesting sessions with Korean producers who had previously worked with Jungkook. They wanted to understand how the blend of structure and fluidity in his sound was created. Even major pop stars began citing him as a vocal reference in the studio. They weren't imitating him, they were learning from his discipline. It was the kind of influence that spread silently, not through headlines, but through practice. When Jungkook performed live on American television, the industry's respect became visible. Backstage footage showed other artists quietly watching, nodding to his timing. They recognized the confidence in restraint. The camera might have captured the performance, but inside that room, it was craft, acknowledging craft. No theatrics, just recognition. It was the moment Jungkook's artistry became part of the American creative vocabulary. The shift wasn't about nationality or genre, it was about precision meeting presence. American artists, who had spent decades mastering live vocals, studio layering, and brand storytelling, saw in Jungkook someone who could hold all of that and still look effortless. He reminded them why audiences first fell in love with singers, not just personalities. His rise didn't threaten anyone, it inspired them. For many, his presence was a wake-up call, a reminder that art could still win over algorithms, that control and sincerity could still dominate a digital era. What makes his Haseon ranking more than a statistic is what followed. American musicians began re-evaluating their creative process. Some credited Jungkook for bringing vocal discipline back to the conversation. Others admired how he carried humility into every collaboration, never overexposing himself, but still leaving impact. His behavior offstage reflected the same precision he had onstage measured, calm and grounded. It made his peers in America feel a sense of kinship. They respected not just the sound, but the man behind it. In many ways, Jungkook's success in America closed a cultural gap that had long existed between the East and the West in pop. He didn't bridge it through marketing, he bridged it through craft. American artists recognized that immediately. They didn't see him as an outsider entering their space. They saw him as someone who had earned a seat at the table by mastering the same language they spoke: music, precision, and emotion translated through discipline. When they applauded him, it wasn't performative. It was professional acknowledgement. The applause meant, "We see you, we understand what it took, and we respect it." Even months after topping the charts, his influence continued quietly in the background. American vocalists referenced his live sets in rehearsals. Sound engineers discussed his vocal layering technique in production meetings. His performances became reference points not as trends, but as standards. To reach Jungkook's level meant reaching a point where discipline looked like ease. And for American artists, that was the ultimate compliment. Jungkook's impact wasn't just musical, it was professional. He reminded the American industry of its own core values: dedication, excellence, and authenticity. Artists who had once relied on spectacle began rethinking performance as connection again. In that sense, Jungkook didn't just enter the American scene, he rebalanced it. His presence recalibrated what success sounded like: less about noise, more about clarity. And the artists who had been searching for that equilibrium saw him as proof that it was still possible. When he became America's Hasson artist, he didn't just earn the title, he earned the respect of those who understood the weight of that position. American artists didn't just applaud him because he was global. They applauded him because they recognized something of themselves in him. The long nights, the repetition, the pursuit of perfection. Jungkook had reached a place where artistry spoke louder than any boundary. And in the quiet admiration of his American peers, that truth echoed louder than any chart could measure. When the noise of celebration faded, what remained was something more meaningful than numbers respect. Jungkook's name stayed in the air, not as a passing trend, but as a presence. In American studios, his performances became quiet examples of how discipline could still dominate an age that values volume over depth. Artists who had once measured success by visibility began looking again at craftsmanship. They watched him perform with balanced voice, steady, emotions sharp but never exaggerated. That restraint spoke to them louder than any viral moment. American singers often face the paradox of fame: how to stay real while being watched by millions. Jungkook solved that without words. He didn't adjust to fit the culture, he simply stood firm in his art until the culture aligned with him. That confidence fascinated his peers. It reminded them that artistry could still command attention without theatrics. His presence was quiet, but absolute, the kind that makes others listen before they even realize they're doing it. As invitations for collaboration began arriving from respected US producers, it wasn't because he was trending, it was because he was trusted. The American scene understood that working with Jungkook meant precision, efficiency, and a genuine commitment to sound. Behind closed doors, more artists spoke his name not as a competitor, but as a standard. They wanted to learn how he maintained focus amid global pressure. They admired how he made every note sound deliberate, how he never wasted a phrase. That was the hidden reaction: admiration mixed with reflection. American artists realized that Jungkook's path wasn't built through shortcuts. It was the long road: consistency, humility, and pure technical strength. They saw in him the same values that had built their own legends, and it created an invisible bridge, one artist to another, one craft to another. No language barriers, No cultural divisions, just mutual recognition between professionals who understood the cost of excellence. The deeper effect of Jungkook's achievement wasn't measured by charts but by influence. Young American singers began citing him as their model for control. Producers adjusted mixes to bring vocals closer to the clarity he achieved. His way of merging discipline with freedom began shaping the next generation's sound. The industry wasn't just reacting to a global star, it was learning from him. By the time the year ended, Jungkook's presence in America had become a quiet, constant, respected by peers, studied by professionals, admired by veterans. He didn't need to remind anyone of his success. The work itself spoke every time it played. And as more artists publicly praised him, one truth became clear. Jungkook hadn't conquered America. He had earned it. His Haseon title was only the headline. The real story was what came after the silence of respect. The nods from artists who understood the weight of mastery, and the realization that the pop world had shifted slightly toward precision again. Jungkook didn't follow the rhythm of the industry. The industry started to follow his. That's how his story in America reached its quiet conclusion, not with spectacle, but with permanence. And in that silence, every artist who had ever chased perfection could see what it looked like when someone finally found it.